The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Hood, Texas. The airfield was already buzzing with activity by 6 in the morning. Helicopters sat in neat rows on the tarmac, their metal bodies gleaming under the bright sky. In the distance, you could hear the sound of engines firing up, the whop-whop-whop of rotors beginning to turn. Captain Sarah Mitchell stood in the pilot briefing room, her uniform pressed sharp, her brown hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was 34 years old, with dark eyes that had seen a lot in her 12 years of military service. She had flown dozens of missions. She had logged over 2,000 hours. She had trained harder than anyone in her squadron. But none of that mattered this morning. "Gentlemen," Colonel Raymond Price announced, standing at the front of the room with his arms crossed. He was 61 years old, a career Air Force officer with 38 years of service. He had a thick neck, gray hair cut military short, and a voice that could cut through steel. "We have a new rotation starting today. I want to talk about the Apache helicopter assignments for the next training cycle." Sarah sat in the back row, listening carefully. Around her were 20 other pilots, mostly men, all with their eyes forward, all waiting for their assignments. "The Apache is our most advanced attack helicopter," Colonel Price continued. "It requires the best of the best, the most experienced pilots, the most composed pilots, the ones who can handle high-pressure situations without falling apart." He paused, he looked down at his clipboard. "I'm assigning the lead position to Major James Tucker. James, you're up for the advanced training program. That's an excellent opportunity for you." The room was quiet except for Major Tucker nodding slightly, accepting the assignment. "I'm also putting Captain David Chen and Captain Robert Martinez on the Apache rotation," the colonel said. "Those are solid choices, good men, good pilots." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. She already knew what was coming. She knew it before the colonel even opened his mouth. She had known it was coming for weeks. "We also need to round out the team," Colonel Price said. He looked down at his clipboard again, and then he looked up and his eyes found Sarah in the back of the room. "Captain Mitchell," he said, "I'm putting you on the general support rotation. You'll be handling transport and logistics flights." The room didn't move. Nobody said anything. But Sarah could feel something shift in the air. She could feel it in the way that some of the pilots turned slightly in their seats. She could feel it in the careful, uncomfortable silence. Sarah raised her hand. "Colonel Price, sir, I'd like to speak with you after the briefing." The colonel looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. "Sure, Mitchell, we'll talk." The briefing ended 10 minutes later. As the pilots filed out, Sarah stayed behind. She waited until the room was empty except for her and Colonel Price. He was organizing his papers, moving slowly, clearly not in any rush. "Sir," Sarah said, her voice steady and professional, "I have the flight hours, I have the qualifications, I have a clean record. I don't understand why I'm not being assigned to the Apache rotation." Colonel Price put down his clipboard. He looked at Sarah with an expression that was almost sympathetic. Almost, but not quite. "Captain," he said, "you know how it is. The Apache is our top platform. It's demanding work. It requires a certain kind of stability, a certain kind of mindset." "I have that," Sarah said. "With all due respect, sir, I've proven that." "You've flown transport helicopters well," the colonel said. "You're good at what you do, reliable, steady, but the Apache is different. It's a weapon system. It's combat-focused. It requires pilots who are mentally tough in ways that go beyond just flying hours." Sarah felt her jaw clench. "Sir, are you saying I'm not mentally tough?" "I'm saying that the Apache role is best filled by men who have the temperament for it," Colonel Price said. He picked up his clipboard again. "That's my decision, Captain. It's final." Sarah stood there for another moment. She wanted to say something. She wanted to argue. She wanted to point out that he was talking about her flying abilities, but what he was really saying was about her being a woman. She knew it. He knew it. But if she said it out loud, if she made it about gender, she would be the problem. She would be the one causing trouble. "Yes, sir," she said finally. "Thank you, sir." She turned and walked out of the briefing room. Later that afternoon, Sarah was in the pilot lounge when she heard the laughter. It started quietly, but it grew louder. She looked up from her coffee. Major Tucker was telling a story to a group of pilots, all of them gathered around him with smiles on their faces. "So I asked her," Major Tucker said. "I asked Captain Mitchell if she wanted to fly the Apache, and you know what she said." Everyone was quiet, waiting for the punchline. "She said yes," Major Tucker laughed. Can you imagine? She asked to fly the Apache. The room erupted in laughter. Real laughter. Genuine, hard laughter. These were experienced pilots, tough men, and they were all laughing at the idea of Sarah flying the most advanced helicopter in the military. "That's rich," one of the other pilots said. "That's really rich." Sarah put down her coffee and stood up. She walked out of the lounge without saying a word. Behind her, the laughter continued. That night, Sarah drove home to her small house on the outskirts of Killeen, Texas, just off the base. It was a one-bedroom cottage she had bought 5 years ago when she thought she was building a life here, a permanent place, a home. The walls were painted soft blue. There were photographs on the mantel. Sarah graduating from flight school, Sarah receiving her wings, Sarah standing with her parents at her college graduation. There were no photographs of her with a man, no photographs of a family, no photographs of anything beyond flying. She sat on her couch in the dark and didn't turn on the lights. She thought about all the things Colonel Price had said. She thought about all the things he hadn't said but meant. She thought about the laughter. Sarah picked up her phone and made a decision. She would prove them wrong. She would show them exactly what she was capable of. And if they wouldn't give her the opportunity, she would make one herself. She scrolled through her contacts and found the number for Admiral James Whitmore. He was the commanding officer of the entire aviation division for the base. He was a 3-star admiral, which meant he was important, powerful, and far above Colonel Price in the chain of command. Sarah had met him once at a formal dinner 2 years ago. They had talked for maybe 5 minutes about the future of the Apache program. He had seemed interested. He had seemed smart. And most importantly, he had seemed like the kind of man who made decisions based on ability rather than tradition. She typed out an email. "Sir, I would like to request a meeting with you regarding my professional development and my interest in the Apache helicopter program. I would greatly appreciate your time." She read it over. It was professional. It was respectful. It didn't mention the colonel or the briefing or the fact that she had been passed over. She pressed send. The email was delivered at 9:47 p.m. By 10:15 p.m., she had a response. "Captain Mitchell, I'd be happy to meet with you. Come by my office tomorrow at 1400 hours. Admiral Whitmore." Sarah set down her phone. She felt something in her chest that she hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't hope exactly. It was something harder than hope. It was determination. It was anger, but the kind of anger that could be turned into fuel. She stood up, walked to her window, and looked out at the Texas sky. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of helicopters. The sound of those great machines. Admiral James Whitmore's office was on the top floor of the main command building at Fort Hood. It was a large space, with big windows that looked out over the entire airfield. You could see for miles from up there. The runways, the helicopter pads, the tarmac stretching out like a gray and green patchwork beneath the Texas sun. The Admiral himself was a tall man, about 65 years old, with silver hair and the kind of posture that came from a lifetime in the military. He wore his uniform with the ease of someone who had worn it for so long it felt like skin. On his chest were medals, rows of them, each one representing some moment of service, some decision he had made, some responsibility he had carried. He stood when Sarah entered his office, which surprised her. Most senior officers didn't stand for junior officers, but Admiral Whitmore did. He smiled and extended his hand. "Captain Mitchell," he said, "good to see you. Please sit." Sarah sat in one of the leather chairs across from his large wooden desk. The Admiral sat back down in his chair. For a moment, he just looked at her, studying her face. "I reviewed your file after your email came in last night," he said. "Impressive record. Flight school top of your class, multiple commendations for excellence in piloting, no disciplinary issues, no safety violations, 2,040 hours of flight time." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "So why are you here?" the Admiral asked. "What is it you want?" Sarah took a breath. She had rehearsed this, but she hadn't written it down. She wanted it to sound genuine, not memorized. "Sir, I want to fly the Apache," she said simply. "I want to be assigned to the advanced combat rotation. Colonel Price assigned me to general support instead. I believe that decision was not based on my qualifications or my ability. I believe it was based on something else." The Admiral leaned back in his chair. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. He was listening now, really listening. "Based on what?" he asked. "Based on the fact that I'm a woman," Sarah said. Sir, with respect to Colonel Price, I don't think he believes women should be flying combat helicopters. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. He stood up and walked over to the window. He looked out at the airfield, at all those helicopters below them. You know what my job is? He asked, not turning around. My job is to make sure that we have the best possible pilots flying the best possible machines, because lives depend on it. Not just the lives of the pilots, but the lives of the people in the field, the soldiers who are depending on air support. When we put someone in the cockpit who isn't the best we can find, people die. He turned back to face Sarah. So I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Do you think you can fly the Apache better than the other pilots being assigned? Sarah met his gaze. Yes, sir, I know I can. How do you know that? The Admiral asked. Because I've studied it, Sarah said. I've logged over 100 hours on the simulator. I've reviewed every system, every protocol, every emergency procedure. I've trained on everything except the actual aircraft because I was never given the chance. But I'm ready, sir, and I want to prove it. The Admiral nodded slowly. Colonel Price is a good man, he said. I've known him for 20 years, but he comes from a different generation, a different time. It takes people like that a while to understand that ability doesn't come in one color or one gender. He walked back to his desk and sat down. Here's what I'm going to do, Admiral Whitmore said. I'm going to give you a chance, one chance. I'm going to authorize you to do a solo flight in the Apache. A full systems demonstration, all the advanced maneuvers, everything that shows what you can do. If you pass that flight, if you show me that you have the skills and the composure to fly that aircraft, I will override Colonel Price's assignment decision, and you will be placed on the combat rotation. Sarah's heart was racing. When, sir? Tomorrow morning, the Admiral said. 5 a.m. That gives you today to review everything and get a good night's sleep. The flight will last 4 hours. I'll be watching from the command center. When you land, I'll know whether you're ready or not. He paused. And Captain, if you're not ready, if you make any mistakes, if I see anything that concerns me, this deal is off. You'll go back to the general support rotation and we won't discuss it again. Understood? Yes, sir, Sarah said. Understood, and thank you, sir, I won't let you down. The Admiral smiled. I don't think you will. Sarah left his office in a daze. She walked down the hallway, down the stairs, out of the building, and all the way to her car. Only when she was sitting in the driver's seat with the door closed did she allow herself to feel anything. This was it, this was her chance. But it was also terrifying, because if she failed, if she made one mistake, if anything went wrong, she would be right back where she started. And this time there would be no one else to turn to. That afternoon, Sarah went to the simulator building. She spent 8 hours running through the Apache systems, forward-looking infrared, Hellfire missiles, 30mm cannon, hover control, high-speed maneuvers, emergency procedures. She ran through every scenario she could think of: hydraulic failure, electrical failure, engine failure. She practiced until her hands moved automatically, until the responses came without thought. At home that night, she tried to sleep but couldn't. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things that could go wrong. What if she missed a switch? What if she made a tiny navigational error? What if the Admiral saw something in her flying that made him lose confidence? At 3 in the morning, she got out of bed and went for a run. She ran through the dark streets of Colleen, her feet hitting the pavement in a steady rhythm. The town was quiet and empty, just the sound of her breathing, just the movement of her body through space. By 4 in the morning, she was showering, getting ready. She dressed in her flight suit carefully, checking every pocket, every fastener. She ate a light breakfast. She drank water. She tried to calm her mind. At 4:45 a.m., she was driving to the base. At 5:00 a.m., she was walking out to the tarmac where an Apache helicopter sat waiting for her. The morning was cool and dark, but the sky was already beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn. The helicopter looked enormous up close, menacing like something alive. The crew chief was waiting for her. "Morning, Captain," he said. "All systems are green. She's ready for you." Sarah nodded. She climbed into the cockpit, settled into the pilot's seat, and began the startup sequence. The Apache came alive around her, systems engaging, instruments lighting up like a constellation of stars. And then she lifted off. The moment the skids left the ground, everything else disappeared. There was no Colonel Price. There was no laughter from the pilot lounge. There was no Admiral watching from the command center. There was only her and the machine and the vast Texas sky stretching out in every direction. She flew like she had never flown before. She pushed the Apache to its limits, performing maneuvers that took her breath away that seemed impossible until she did them. She flew fast and smooth and clean. She made every correction before it became a problem. She anticipated every issue. She was in perfect harmony with the machine. The Apache climbed into the brightening sky, and Sarah guided it north toward the training ranges. Below her, the Texas landscape rolled out in shades of brown and green, sparse and vast. This was one of the best training areas in the country. Plenty of room to fly, minimal population centers, and terrain that challenged pilots in realistic ways. Sarah had done this flight 100 times in the simulator, but the simulator had never felt like this. In the simulator, everything was controlled, everything was predictable. The motion base could only move so much. The graphics, however good, were still graphics. The sound was still canned audio. This was real. The Apache was responsive in a way the simulator could never capture. It moved with her inputs dancing through the air. It was fast, faster than anything she had flown before. When she wanted to bank left, it banked left. When she wanted to dive, it dove. But it was also stable, predictable, engineered by people who understood exactly what a pilot needed. Sarah took the helicopter through a series of maneuvers. A hard turn to the right, climbing 500 feet in seconds. A descent that made her stomach float, the G-forces pushing her against the seat. Hover control, where she held the aircraft completely still in the air, a perfect platform for targeting and weapons deployment. Lateral flight, moving sideways, which felt strange and exhilarating. Then she moved to the advanced maneuvers. She came in low, 50 feet above the ground, moving at 150 knots. This was dangerous flying. One mistake, one moment of distraction, and the helicopter would hit the ground. But Sarah was focused completely. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were sharp. She was aware of everything: altitude, airspeed, engine temperature, fuel consumption, distance from the ground. She pulled up sharply, banking to the right, then inverted the Apache, upside down for just a moment before rolling back upright. Her heart was pounding now, but her hands never shook. She took the helicopter to 3,000 feet and performed a combat approach, diving at high speed toward an imaginary target. At the last moment, she flared out, bringing the Apache to a hover, perfectly positioned to fire weapons. She held that position for 30 seconds, rock steady, before climbing out again. It was 4 hours of perfect flying, 4 hours of showing exactly what she was capable of. Then she headed back to base. As she approached the airfield, she could see the command center. She imagined the Admiral sitting there, watching her landing, making his decision. Her hands were steady as she brought the Apache down. The landing gear touched the tarmac smoothly, gently. She taxied to the parking area and shut down the engines. The rotors slowed, the cockpit went quiet. Sarah sat there for a moment, breathing deeply, letting her heart rate come back to normal. She had done it. She had flown perfectly. She had shown them everything. She climbed out of the cockpit and saw the Admiral waiting on the tarmac. He was walking toward her with an expression on his face that Sarah couldn't read. Behind him, she could see Colonel Price. The colonel looked angry, very angry. The Admiral reached her first. "That," he said, "was some of the finest flying I've ever seen." Sarah felt something release inside her chest. "Thank you, sir." "You're being assigned to the Apache combat rotation, effective immediately," the Admiral said. He didn't shake her hand, but he put his hand on her shoulder. "Welcome to the team, Captain." Colonel Price stepped forward. His face was red, his jaw clenched. "Sir," the colonel said, "with all respect, this is highly irregular. This violates the chain of command. I made my decision as the squadron commander, and it should be respected." "I respect your decision," Admiral Whitmore said calmly, "and I'm overriding it. The Army looks for the best pilots we can find. Captain Mitchell demonstrated in that flight that she is one of the best pilots we have. That's not a subjective opinion, Colonel. That's a professional assessment. We're done here." The Admiral turned and walked away. Colonel Price stood there staring at Sarah. His face was hard, his eyes cold. For a long moment he didn't say anything. Then he turned and walked toward the command center. Sarah realized something in that moment. She had won. But she hadn't won because Colonel Price changed his mind. She had won by going around him. And that meant something important. He would never forgive her for that. He would carry this, and it would grow, and somehow, someway, he would find a way to make her pay. For 3 months, Sarah flew the Apache. She flew combat training missions. She flew tactical exercises. She flew in formation with other pilots. She flew alone, pushing the limits of the aircraft and her own abilities. She was good, better than good. She was excellent. The pilots who had laughed at her in the lounge didn't laugh anymore. They watched her fly. They saw what she could do. Some of them came up to her and admitted they had been wrong. Others just stayed quiet, just nodded when they passed her in the hallway. Sarah didn't care. She wasn't there to make friends. She was there to do her job. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything started to go wrong. Sarah was doing a routine maintenance flight, checking all the systems of one of the Apache helicopters. She had done this flight 100 times. It was simple work, necessary work, but not exciting. She took the helicopter up and checked the stabilization systems, the rotor speed, the hydraulic pressure, all the things that kept the aircraft flying safely. Everything was normal, everything checked out. Then, as she was bringing the helicopter back down, she felt something strange. A vibration. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would cause immediate alarm, but something that wasn't right. Sarah immediately reported it to the flight control tower. "Tower, this is Captain Mitchell," she said. "I'm noticing an unusual vibration in the rotor system. Nothing critical, but I want to land and have maintenance check it out." "Understood, Captain," the tower said. "You're cleared to land on pad 3. Sarah landed perfectly. The moment the skids touched down, she began the shutdown procedure. The engines spooled down, the rotors slowed. Before she could complete the shutdown, the crew chief was there, pulling open the cockpit door. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Rotor vibration," Sarah said. "Nothing serious, but it shouldn't be there. I want maintenance to check it before we fly again." The crew chief nodded. "I'll get the maintenance team, don't touch anything." 2 hours later, Sarah was in Colonel Price's office. "Captain Mitchell," the colonel said, his voice carefully controlled. "I've been reviewing your maintenance report. You reported a rotor vibration during a routine system check." "Yes, sir," Sarah said. "I felt something unusual and reported it immediately." "The maintenance team has completed their inspection," the colonel said. "They found absolutely nothing wrong with the aircraft. No damage, nowhere, nothing that would cause any vibration." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "Sir, I know what I felt." "What you felt," Colonel Price said slowly, "might have been a lot of things, a temporary anomaly, a sensor reading that corrected itself. You might have been tired. You might have been overthinking things." He leaned forward. "What concerns me, Captain, is that you might be looking for problems where there aren't any. Might be seeing issues that don't exist. That's the kind of thing that gets pilots killed. That kind of paranoia, that kind of second-guessing yourself." Sarah wanted to argue, but she also knew what was happening. She had landed that helicopter perfectly. The maintenance team had found nothing. So now the issue wasn't the helicopter. The issue was her judgment, her reliability, her mental state. "I was following protocol, sir," she said. "Report anything unusual." "I understand," Colonel Price said. "And I appreciate your caution, but let's be clear about something. If you keep reporting phantom problems, if you keep saying there's something wrong when there isn't, the other pilots are going to lose confidence in you. And when pilots lose confidence in each other, that's when accidents happen." He stood up. "You're grounded from flying for the next 2 weeks," he said. "During that time, I want you to do some refresher training, and I want you to see our flight surgeon, Dr. Helen Chen, for a psychological evaluation." "A psychological evaluation," Sarah said. "Sir, there's nothing wrong with me psychologically." "Probably not," Colonel Price said. "But after 2 weeks of desk duty and a clean evaluation from the flight surgeon, you'll be back flying again. This is just standard procedure. It's nothing to worry about." He was lying. Sarah could see it in his face. This wasn't standard procedure. This was punishment. This was Colonel Price finding a way to make her pay for going around him, for making him look bad, for proving him wrong. The next 2 weeks were some of the longest of Sarah's life. She sat at a desk doing paperwork. She attended refresher training sessions with pilots who were junior to her. She answered the same questions over and over about her flying procedures, her decision-making process, her judgment. And then she had the appointment with Dr. Helen Chen. The flight surgeon's office was small and clinical. Dr. Chen was a woman in her 50s, professional and kind. Sarah liked her immediately. "So," Dr. Chen said, "I'm supposed to do a psychological evaluation. Have you been feeling depressed? anxious. "No," Sarah said. "I feel fine. Better than fine, actually. I love flying the Apache. I'm good at it. But Colonel Price wanted me to do this evaluation, so here I am." Dr. Chen made some notes. "I read the incident report. You reported a rotor vibration that maintenance couldn't find. How did that make you feel?" "Frustrated," Sarah said. "I know what I felt, but I also understand that maintenance found nothing. So either the vibration corrected itself or I was mistaken about what I was feeling. Either way, I think it should have been investigated." "Do you often second-guess your own perceptions?" Dr. Chen asked. "No," Sarah said. "I trust my instincts. My instincts have kept me safe and kept people around me safe. But I also understand that sometimes instincts can be wrong." They talked for another hour. Dr. Chen asked her about her sleep, her diet, her stress level, her family history, her past. And Sarah answered everything honestly. When it was over, Dr. Chen told her something that surprised her. "You're fine," the doctor said. "There's nothing wrong with you psychologically. You're a healthy, stable, well-adjusted person. Your judgment is sound. Your decision-making is clear. You're exactly the kind of person we want flying our aircraft." Sarah felt a wave of relief. "Will you tell Colonel Price that?" "Of course," Dr. Chen said. "It's my professional opinion and I'll document it in my report. You should be cleared to fly again." But when Sarah checked with Colonel Price 3 days later, he told her something different. "The flight surgeon's evaluation came back," he said. "She found some concerns, nothing serious but enough to recommend an extended evaluation. You're going to be in a training program with one of our senior pilots, Captain Marcus Wade. You'll fly with him for the next month and he'll evaluate your performance." Sarah knew for certain now. Colonel Price was lying. He was lying to her face and he was lying to the entire squadron. He wasn't following procedure. He was making up procedure. He was engineering a situation where she would be permanently sidelined. "Sir," Sarah said, "I spoke with Dr. Chen. She told me my evaluation was clear. She said I'm psychologically fit to fly." "Dr. Chen is not making the final determination," Colonel Price said. "I am, and I've decided that you need more supervised flying before you return to solo missions. That's my decision as squadron commander." Sarah wanted to appeal. She wanted to go over his head again. But she also knew that if she did that, she would look exactly like what Colonel Price was claiming she was. Someone with poor judgment, someone who couldn't follow orders, someone who was unstable. "This is bullshit," Wade said to her one day after they had landed from a training mission. "There's nothing wrong with your flying. Your judgment is perfect. I've reviewed your records, and that rotor vibration report was exactly what you should have done. Protocol demands it." "I know," Sarah said, "but I can't prove that Colonel Price is lying. He's saying Dr. Chen recommended extended evaluation. He's saying there are concerns. It's his word against mine." "Not necessarily," Wade said. "There are records, there are procedures, there's a paper trail. If you file a formal complaint with the Inspector General's office, they can investigate." Sarah had thought about this, but she also knew what filing a complaint would mean. It would mean going public. It would mean accusing Colonel Price of lying, of violating her rights, of unfair treatment. It would mean opening herself up to accusations that she was a troublemaker, that she was difficult, that she couldn't handle disagreement. And even if she won, even if the Inspector General found in her favor, she would still have to work with Colonel Price. She would still have to see him every day. She would still have to follow his orders. So she didn't file a complaint. Instead, she did something different. She reached out to someone she knew from her time at flight school, a reporter, a woman named Jessica Martinez who wrote for a military publication called Defense Today. Sarah agreed to speak with her on the condition of complete anonymity. Over 2 weeks, Jessica Martinez investigated the story. She talked to the flight surgeon. She talked to Captain Wade. She reviewed the maintenance reports. She looked into Colonel Price's history. What she found was damning. Colonel Price had a pattern. Over the last 10 years, he had passed over 6 female pilots for advanced assignments. 6. He had always found reasons, always had justifications that sounded professional. But when Jessica dug deeper, she found that those justifications didn't hold up. The female pilots had comparable records to the male pilots who did receive the advanced assignments. But there was more. Jessica found that one of those female pilots, Captain Susan White, had actually complained about the treatment. Her complaint had been filed with the Inspector General 5 years ago. and the Inspector General had found that Colonel Price had violated regulations, but nothing had been done about it. Captain White had been transferred to a different base, and Colonel Price had been left alone. The story ran in defense today 2 weeks later. The headline was huge. Military official blocks female pilots from advanced roles. Evidence suggests pattern of gender bias. The article detailed Colonel Price's history. It included interviews with the female pilots. It included the maintenance report, the flight surgeon's evaluation, the training records. It told the story of Sarah Mitchell, though not by name. It told the story of a qualified pilot who was being sidelined because of her gender. Within hours, the story went viral. News outlets picked it up. Major news networks started covering it. The story became national news. And everything changed. The Secretary of the Air Force launched an investigation. The Inspector General opened a formal inquiry. News vans arrived at Fort Hood. Reporters were everywhere. 3 days after the story broke, Sarah was called to Admiral Whitmore's office. "Come in, Captain," the Admiral said. "Please sit." Sarah sat. The Admiral looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. "I know it was you," he said. "I know you talked to the reporter, and I want you to know that I think you made the right decision." "Sir," Sarah started. "Let me finish," the Admiral said. "What Colonel Price did was wrong. What he did to you was wrong. What he did to the other pilots was wrong. The Air Force is supposed to be a meritocracy. We're supposed to promote the best pilots, the best leaders, the best officers. We're not supposed to care about gender. We're only supposed to care about ability." He leaned back in his chair. "Colonel Price has been relieved of command, effective immediately. He's being placed on administrative leave while the investigation continues. There's talk of court-martial, but I'll leave that to the legal team." He leaned forward. "What I want to tell you is this. Thank you. What you did was brave. You could have just accepted the situation and moved on to another base. But you didn't. You fought. And in fighting for yourself, you also fought for every other female pilot who comes after you." Sarah felt tears in her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "What happens now, sir?" "Now you fly," the Admiral said. "You go back to the Apache rotation, full solo authority. Captain Wade will no longer be your supervisor. You'll fly with the other combat pilots, and you'll do what you were meant to do." He stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome back to active combat flight status, Captain Mitchell. The Army is lucky to have you." Sarah shook his hand. She was shaking now, but she maintained her composure. That afternoon, Sarah walked into the pilot lounge. The place went quiet. Everyone turned to look at her. The pilots who had laughed at her months ago were looking at the ground, not meeting her eyes. Major Tucker stood up. "Captain Mitchell," he said, "I wanted to say that I'm sorry about what happened before. That wasn't right. I hope you accept my apology." Sarah nodded. "I do, thank you, Major." One by one, the other pilots approached her. Some apologized. Some just welcomed her back. Some didn't say anything at all, just nodded in acknowledgement. Captain Wade came over to her with a huge smile on his face. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." "We did it," Sarah said. "You helped me get the evidence. You were willing to tell the truth." That night, Sarah drove out to a place she loved, a high point outside of Killeen that looked out over the Texas countryside. She could see the lights of the base in the distance, the runways lit up like constellations. The next morning, she was back in the cockpit. The Apache came alive around her like greeting an old friend. She lifted off, banking into the bright Texas sky. Below her, the world spread out in all its beauty and vastness. Up there, she was free. Up there, she was exactly who she was meant to be. 2 weeks later, Sarah was assigned to a real combat support mission. A unit in the field needed air cover, and Sarah was one of the pilots chosen to provide it. As she flew toward that distant place, toward danger, toward the real purpose of the Apache, she thought about everything that had brought her here. She thought about the laughter in the lounge. She thought about Colonel Price's contempt. She thought about the Admiral's faith in her. And she flew with perfect precision, with absolute confidence, with the knowledge that she had earned every single right to be in that cockpit. The story didn't end when Colonel Price was relieved of duty. It didn't end when Sarah returned to flight status. The story continued every time she flew, every time she proved herself, every time a female pilot looked up and saw that if someone else had made it through, maybe they could too. The story of Sarah Mitchell became the story of change. Change that started with one woman asking for a chance. Change that continued because she refused to accept injustice. Change that rippled out and affected every pilot who came after her. And in the end, that mattered so much more than just being the best pilot alive.